This is the second question that I've established that you could look at. It doesn't really do much different in terms of structure because it's actually the same sort of structure that's going to be used very frequently, either 2 and 7 or 4 things to explain, 4 points from 4 marks for explanation and 5 things to identify. So it's very similar to the previous one. It just uses a slightly different set of code segments that you might be able to talk about because I don't know what's going to be in the test questions. So it's just about using whatever you get. So I've used the same scenario in this first one where you've applied for a job, you've asked to see what you can say about a piece of pseudocode. The structure is the same. There are 2 things to explain and 5 features to identify. As I say, it could be 2 and 7. I don't know. So you could say that you might get just A and B, and that would be the structure of the question. Very much the same sort of thing with this sort of, you'll see an image in the question, which is line numbers on the left and instructions on the right hand side. It's a piece of pseudocode that gives an algorithm, which is a solution to a problem. And I don't think we need to spend quite as long on it this time, as long as you just bear back on the other one that we look back at the other one that we talked about before in example 1. Exactly the same strategy I'm going to do. So what I'll do is I'll look at the A and B questions and then we'll talk about each line of code so that you could identify 5 features for question C. So for part A, it says explain the purpose of the code at line 14. And then it goes on to say what's the purpose of this whole segment of code, this whole section of code from 14 to 19. So I think it's easier if we look at it in Notepad++ because I can kind of relate the lines by highlighting them here. So in line 14, what's the purpose of that? What we've got here is a conditional statement which contains a conditional check. So what's the purpose? It says it's setting up a conditional statement to check where the subject to VAT is true. Now, in here we've got a single equals sign in line 9, and that's an assignment from right to left. So whatever is in the right-hand side is assigned to whatever's in the left-hand side. But here, in line 14, a double equals is what's called an equality check. Now, because we've got a bool, which is subject to VAT, we're checking whether it's true. If it was a number, our equality check might be equal or greater than, or equal or less than, because we're comparing 2 numbers together. And remember, an equality check, this conditional check, always has to return a Boolean value. So, line 14 has set up a conditional statement that uses the conditional check subject to VAT is true to determine the path that follows. So for part B, the path that follows this check in the conditional statement is if it is true, the variable gross is assigned the net value plus whatever the net value times the VAT rate is. Think about this. VAT is currently £1 plus 20%, the same as here actually. So if we had a thing that cost £1 net, if it was subject to VAT, we'd say that the gross price of it is £1 plus £1 times 0.2, 20%. Print message, so we're saying message was here the string and what was subject to VAT and the price is, and then add, concatenate the gross value. Else, if this is false, if this conditional check evaluates to false, the gross is just the same as the net because no VAT is going to be added. And then you print the message for the gross prices and it's just going to be exactly the same as the net price, but it doesn't say that. It just says that it was not subject to VAT, was subject to VAT, and prints out the gross value. So we can now move on to part C, and that was the same as the one before, which is identify 5 separate coding techniques used in the pseudocode. So remember, you got to put the line number and the technique you identify. So that's really important because you won't get the marks without both of those elements. So let's start at line 1. What is line 1? Line 1, a comment has been used to describe the code. Line 2, there's nothing there. Line 3, a double type variable called VAT rate has been declared. Now you get that once. You can only use that once. Now I don't know whether you would get the mark if it said a bool type variable called subject to VAT has been declared. Declaring the variable, I think I'd probably give you the mark because there are different types of variables. But I would not maybe risk it. A string type variable called message is declared. Now you get another mark if you suddenly say the variable VAT rate is initialized with the value 0.2. But once again, only use it once. The variable net has been initialized with the value 0, and so forth. Now, we described line 14 in the question beforehand, but I think it would be perfectly valid to say line 14 creates a conditional statement to check if the subject of VAT is true. I'd give you the mark. That's a coding technique. It's a conditional statement, using a conditional check. I'd give you the mark. Line 16 is assigning the value of net plus net times the VAT rate to gross, adding the VAT to the net price. 17, displaying a message to the user giving the net price. Line 19, the else is what's used if subject to VAT evaluates as false. So if this is false, this won't run, this will. So, line 21, the value of net is assigned to the variable gross. Or maybe the value of the variable net is assigned to the variable gross. Now if you've used this one, you can't use this one because it's the same. A message is displayed to the user saying that it's not subject to VAT and the price of the gross item, or the gross price of the item. So I think that's pretty straightforward. So you've got to take out 5 different things from this, and as I said, there's plenty here to pick from, and you'll get the 5 marks if you rehearse this. Make sure that you're doing exactly the same as I advised in video 1, where you say, with a pal, with a buddy, whatever you want to do, with a pair, you ask them, what's at line 3? And you learn to describe it so that it will get the mark. The variable VAT rate is declared as a double. The variable net is declared as a double. Then you ask in turn, what's happening at line 9? The variable VAT rate is assigned the value 0.2, and so forth. That will get you the mark. It's exactly what's happening at that line of code. And the more expert you become at this, the more secure your markings are going to be in the test. And as I say, the range is actually quite small, so make sure that you really practice this to pick up as many marks as you can. I would maybe even think that this question, this part C, could be done before part A and B, because I think this will help you to understand what's happening in the algorithm, because A asks you what's happening at this line, and B asks you about the group of code. So I think maybe doing this bit first may actually help you to understand how to answer parts A and B, because they say what's happening in this section of code, and you've just told them in part C. So you're getting kind of a double value out of that. And maybe that's the way to approach these types of questions, is to do the C part here, identify the 5 features, and that will help you to understand what's happening in the code. You may be able to start at the top and read it down and say, oh yes, that's what's happening. We've got variables being declared, we've got variables being initialized. We're going to do a conditional statement to check whether the VAT is true. And if it's true, we're going to add VAT. And if it's not, we'll just say the net price is going to become the gross price because they're exactly the same. No VAT is added. So maybe you can do that. And if you're weak on this, I strongly advise maybe to do C first, so you know what each line is doing, and then attempt to answer A and B. So that's my advice on the pseudocode. We'll probably do one more of these, and we'll just make sure that you're as strong as you can be, because this is 9 marks. So 9 marks is quite a chunk, and it should give you, a lot of confidence that you can go into this knowing exactly what you've got to do.